On a freezing night in the Ural Mountains in 1959, 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of a tent from the inside, fled into the black Siberian night, some barefoot, some only in socks, and walked into a blizzard that they did not survive. Some were found with minor injuries. 2 showed chest fractures like they'd been crushed by a machine. Clothing from some bodies showed unusual levels of radiation. The official case file closed. The debate did not. In this episode of Matt Knows, we reopen the Dyatlov Pass mystery. We'll go through the facts that we can agree on, examine the major theories from Avalanche to secret weapons, weigh the strongest evidence for and against each, rebuilding the night in words, and asking, can the mountain itself explain this tragedy? By the end of this video I want you to pick a side, defend it in the comments, natural disaster or human agency, which explains the 9 deaths on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. January 1959. A mixed group of Soviet university students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a winter hike across the northern slopes of the Ural range. They were not amateurs, they were experienced, many were seasoned in snow and cold, they knew winter. Among them was a man who did not finish the final leg. Yuri Yudin fell ill on the way and turned back. Because he survived, Yudin later became the closest living window into the group's plans and personalities. They wanted to reach Otorten and had planned a safe route. But bad weather and tough terrain pushed them off course. On the night of February 1st they pitched a tent on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, a mountain whose local name is often translated as Dead Mountain. When they didn't show up as scheduled, relatives alerted authorities. Search teams arrived and found something that made no sense. A tent with its entrance cut from the inside, its occupants gone but sleds and equipment left behind. Outside were footprints leading downhill into the trees, some returning, others continued on and ended mid-snow, as if the person simply vanished. Forensic teams eventually found bodies in 2 clusters, one near the cedar woods at the tree line, the other deep in the forest, under a thin canopy of branches and snow. Those are the baseline facts, the things every theory must explain. Here's the odd mix of physical evidence that has kept this case alive and are the core physical facts that any convincing explanation needs to cover. Tent damage. The tent was found cut open from the inside, not unzipped, not cleanly opened. The cut suggests a rapid, possibly panicked exit. Footprints. The footprints in the snow led downslope and into the tree line. Some returned, others ended abruptly. Some footprints indicated people barefoot or in socks, inexplicable behavior for experienced hikers in sub-zero temperatures. Clothing. Many of the victims were found partially undressed, some in socks or barefoot. One victim had removed her shoes and fur coat and was found with more clothes on top of another person. That pattern hints at hypothermia, paradoxical behavior where victims remove clothes when they are freezing. Bodies. The bodies were found in 2 clusters, some close to the tree line near the tent, others farther into the forest and in ravines. Trauma. 2 victims had severe internal chest and skull fractures, injuries on par with high-force impacts, but there was very little external trauma to match. A 3rd body had a fractured skull. For years that detail has generated explanations ranging from a fall to an attack by something massive. Radiation. Some clothing items measured slightly elevated radioactivity. The readings were certainly unusual and seeded conspiracy theories, but they were not, on their own, proof of a nuclear event. Autopsies and reports. Autopsy reports described catastrophic internal injuries in at least 2 victims, massive chest compression fractures, a 3rd had skull trauma. These injuries were disproportionately severe compared to surface trauma. However, Soviet autopsy reports and investigator notes were incomplete by modern standards. Some details were lost, classified, or contradictory. Those features: torn tent, inexplicable flight into the night, paradoxical undressing, severe internal injuries, and traces of radiation, are the bones the theories get fitted to. Now let's see which theories best put the skeleton back together. The simplest explanation offered by many scientists is a snow event, a slab avalanche, or a sudden small slide that surprised the team and made them desert the tent. The most widely accepted natural explanation is a slab avalanche, a thin plate of snow that breaks loose and moves downhill as a coherent slab atop a weaker layer. Slab avalanches can start small, jolt a campsite, and produce powerful compressive waves. Here is why it's persuasive. Tent position and slope. The tent sat on a slope. Snow dynamics can create a localized slab that loosens and moves with enough force to terrify and injure. A slab avalanche can produce a wave of snow powerful enough to knock people down and apply large, short-duration compression to a body. These compression can lead to internal injuries and fractures without obvious external cuts. Urgent escape fits. If a slab or avalanche hit, cutting the tent from the inside may have been the quickest way out. Hikers often flee downslope to avoid being buried. A short descent into trees could explain the footprints. Hypothermia behavior. If the hikers became separated, lost, and then succumbed to hypothermia, paradoxical undressing, victims removing clothes in confusion, explains why some were found partially naked. 2021 official ruling. In recent years, investigators from Russia concluded a natural avalanche was the most likely cause, a finding many experts accept as plausible. But the avalanche picture also has problems. Damage and burial. The tent showed no large outside compressive damage that typically accompanies a high-energy avalanche burial. There was also almost no sign of large displacement of the tent by snow. The internal injuries. 2 victims had chest fractures with force like a car crash, far beyond what minor slab overrun typically causes. No large debris field. Classic avalanches move masses of snow and create clear scouring and debris patterns. The recorded scene did not have clear indications of a large avalanche event at that site. So the avalanche hypothesis is powerful because it offers an economy of explanation. It explains the sudden flight, the tent cutting, and the later hypothermia, and is therefore accepted by many forensic teams. But if that's the whole answer, we still need to explain the injury patterns and the lack of large debris in addition to the strange clothing anomalies. These missing explanations keep legitimate doubts alive. If not a visible avalanche, could something intangible have caused a panicked sudden flight? A more exotic but fascinating theory hinges not on big visible forces, but on invisible ones, infrasound. Under certain meteorological conditions, katabatic winds or wind flowing over peaks can set up low-frequency pressure waves that make human ears and brains interpret the environment as terrifying. In lab studies, some low-frequency tones can create nausea, anxiety, feelings of dread, along with disorientation and panic. The infrasound hypothesis argues panic flight, ultrasonic or infrasonic sounds could have triggered a sudden panic attack in the middle of the night. A panicked group might cut their way out of the tent and flee into the night without shoes. No need for a large avalanche. This explains why there might be no large debris pattern, nothing physically huge displaced them, but they fled anyway. Fits paradoxical behavior. If they were disoriented from wind or sound, removing clothes or confusing survival instincts could follow. However, the critics point out that it lacks direct evidence. There is no recorded infrasound data from that night. The idea remains speculative without measurable signals. Doesn't explain severe trauma. Panic alone does not produce crushed chests or fractured skulls. Something else would need to cause those injuries. In short, infrasound could explain the puzzling flight behavior but not the heavy injuries. It's seductive because it explains the human oddity, why experienced hikers would run into the night, but it doesn't close the whole case. The most realistic natural model may be a hybrid, a small, localized slab that slightly shocked the tent or the slope combined with a panicked reaction, perhaps amplified by infrasound or strange winds, which produced a chaotic exit and subsequent hypothermia. That combination can cover a lot of ground. It explains why experienced hikers would behave irrationally and also gives a mechanism for compressive injuries. It's conservative and requires no conspiracy theories, secret weapons, or sinister human agency. However, even with a plausible natural model, gaps remain. Fragmentary records, translation errors in archives, and a Cold War context that bred secrecy mean missing pages and contradictions. Those gaps invite alternative, often dramatic stories, and that's why the case persists in public imagination. One persistent cluster of theories blames human agency, secret weapons tests, military parachute mines, or other clandestine operations. Cold War near-Siberian testing did occur, and the presence of slightly radioactive clothing was seized on as possible proof of a military explanation. It's easy to see why military theories flourish. We're talking about 1959 Soviet Union, a place and era where secrecy was normal and military testing often happened in remote regions. Arguments for this view. Radioactivity. The small radioactive readings on some garments are used to imply contact with military testing materials or fallout. Unexplained trauma. High-force injuries could have resulted from blast effects or concussive waves if a nearby military device detonated. Secrecy climate. The Soviet Union prosecuted and suppressed some investigative documents, lending plausibility to the idea of official cover-up. Arguments against. Scale and probability. A military blast powerful enough to cause chest fractures across several people would likely have produced more obvious environmental damage and additional witnesses. Radioactivity levels. The radiation found on clothing was low and could have plausible alternative explanations: contamination from natural deposits, industrial sources, or handling. Lack of documentation. While secrecy existed, no credible archive has produced incontrovertible proof of a test that night at that place. Other human agency ideas include interpersonal conflict, a hostile encounter, or a bungled covert operation. For each, we look for motive, means, and evidence. The case lacks clear motive or reliable evidence of an assault. No consistent defensive wounds point to an altercation. The covert op theory requires documentation that doesn't yet exist in public archives. That doesn't mean foul play is impossible, only that it is not strongly supported by the physical scene as currently known. This class of theory does not have the economy of the Avalanche explanation, but it taps into Cold War fears and the historical reality of secret military activity, which makes it compelling to many, but it needs concrete forensic or archival proof. Less accepted but mentioned over the years are classic interpersonal or animal violence theories: an attack by an animal, an altercation within the group, or a hostile encounter with local people. Why it's weak. Inconsistencies with evidence. There were no typical animal claw marks, and human assault would be expected to leave a pattern of external trauma and defensive wounds. Lack of motive or evidence. The hikers were a small, well-known group. There's no historical evidence of local hostility or sheep rustling leading to murder. So these explanations are generally regarded as unlikely. Let's return to the most troubling physical detail: internal injuries that appear disproportionate. Modern forensic experts argue these injuries could be explained in several ways. Compression injuries from deep snow or tree fall. A large mass of overrunning snow, fallen trees, or a heavy impact could generate massive compressive force without leaving large external lacerations. Secondary falls. A hiker who falls into a ravine or under a fallen tree could sustain massive internal trauma while appearing relatively intact externally. Blunt force from rescue or handling. Some have speculated that rough handling or later processioning could have caused or worsened injuries. However, proper autopsy timing and internal bleed patterns indicate injuries were perimortem, occurring around the time of death. Bomb or explosive concussion. A close blast could compress internal organs while leaving the skin relatively intact. That's why some people point to military tests. But again, there's no smoking gun record. Impact from a rolling mass of snow. A slab avalanche or snow slab moving across the tent could exert downward compression on someone lying under shallow snow, causing internal fractures. All of these possibilities remain on the table because the injuries are not completely diagnostic of one single cause. At present, compressed force explanations remain plausible. They are compatible with a localized slab avalanche that didn't leave the textbook avalanche signature but still generated deadly short-range compression. Next, radiation. Some garments showed slightly elevated radioactivity. Does that prove a nuclear test or a secret weapons test? Not necessarily. Before leaping to conspiracies, consider these possibilities. Background contamination. Certain minerals and sources in the Urals can produce measurable radioactivity. Clothing could pick up contamination during field work. Industrial sources. Nearby mining or industrial work could have contributed. Handling and measurement problems. Instruments and early measurement protocols were imperfect. Secondary contamination could have happened during evidence transport. Experts in nuclear forensics caution against leaping from low-level contamination to weapons testing without isotopic signatures that specifically match known nuclear materials. Which means the radiation detail is intriguing but inconclusive on its own. In short, radiation is an intriguing data point but not, by itself, proof of a nuclear blast or secret weapons testing. It remains a loose end that fuels suspicion. It can be argued that the tent is the most important clue and the start point for any explanation. Across theories, the tent detail is central. Cutting a tent from the inside is not the same as unzipping it in an orderly manner and is certainly not a normal action. It's messy, urgent, and points to a need to escape quickly. Why cut? Rapid escape. If the zipper was frozen, cutting from inside would be fastest. Preventing exposure. If the interior filled with smoke from fire or there was a sudden change, like wind or snow, cutting allows immediate escape. Panic/disorientation. A panicked group may not behave rationally. Panic can cause rushed, destructive choices. Whatever the precise cause, the tent detail demands a fast, interior-triggered event, a reason to flee now. Avalanche, infrasound panic, or proximate danger all explain this behavior. Which is best depends on which other pieces of evidence you weigh more heavily. We live in a world of incomplete files and imperfect translations. Some autopsy notes were lost, some investigative pages were redacted or poorly transcribed into translation. Those gaps create fertile ground for theories to sprout. That's why objective reanalysis using neutral, repeatable computational tools is so valuable. It reduces the room for imaginative leaps. Now we reach the core proposition of this video: what can AI and modern forensic tech do that might finally tilt the scales? Modern technology gives us tools that 1959 investigators did not have. Here's what a modern reanalysis could do. 1. AI-enhanced image reconstruction. The original evidence includes grainy black and white photographs. Modern image enhancement can clarify small features, snowpack layers, footprints, and tent orientation. AI doesn't invent facts. Good models can denoise and expose previously invisible textures. 2. 3D terrain and avalanche modeling. High-resolution digital elevation models, DEMs. Even from satellite LiDAR and SRTM successors, let scientists run physical simulations of snow slabs. With modern physics engines and climate reanalysis, we can test whether a slab avalanche of the exact size required could occur at that spot. If it could, motion simulations under measured snow conditions can test whether a slab of a given size and speed could produce the observed effects. 3. Forensic biomechanics. Simulating precise forces to match the chest fractures using computational models, to ask whether a human chest could be fractured by a slab of snow moving at X velocity. 4. Reanalysis of weather and wind. Using reanalysis datasets, we can approximate wind behavior that night and test the plausibility of katabatic winds and infrasound generation. 5. Chemical and isotopic analysis, if samples exist. Modern labs can re-examine cloth fibers and residues to better quantify radiation, isotope signatures, and possible contamination sources. 6. Satellite and archive searches. Modern archives may reveal previously classified logs, declassified military records, or satellite imagery that overlap the region in later decades. AI can comb these digital archives quickly. Combined, these methods can test specific, falsifiable hypotheses rather than rely on broad storytelling. That's the scientific promise: turn speculation into testable models. If we were to run a modern reanalysis, the workflow would be: identify and retrieve primary materials, original scene photos, autopsy reports, clothing samples, and exact coordinates. Secure chain of custody and permissions for retesting if samples exist. Recreate a high-resolution 3D model of the tent site from DEMs, satellite data, and any drone footage possible. Use known snowpack physics and measured local winter data to simulate possible slab events matched to the 1959 season. Run biomechanics simulations on thoracic models to compare trauma patterns. Retest any physical samples for isotopic signatures. Simultaneously, run an automated archive search to find any potentially relevant military logs or aviation reports. If those steps produce a consistent picture, for instance, if a slab simulation reproduces the tent pattern and the biomechanics reproduce the chest fractures, the natural hypothesis gets a big boost. If the isotopes match weapons material or archives show military tests, the human activity hypothesis would gain support. In combination, these tools don't guarantee closure, but they provide methods to validate or falsify specific hypotheses in ways the 1959 investigators could not. Imagine a modern investigation team approaching the site. Build a high-resolution 3D model of Kholat Syakl's terrain from satellite DEMs and drone scans. Reconstruct the tent location precisely. Run Slab avalanche simulations using measured snow physical properties, density, cohesion, based on modern winter data reanalysis. Simulate a slab of the size that could create the observed footprints and low external tent damage yet create local compressive forces on certain parts of the tent. Use forensic biomechanics to replicate the chest fractures with controlled compression forces applied to synthetic rib cages. Re-examine clothing for isotopic signatures that could distinguish industrial contamination from weapons-grade isotopes. If those steps align, if the simulation reproduces the tent, footfall pattern, and injury profile, the avalanche hypothesis becomes much stronger. If it doesn't, we must look elsewhere. On the other hand, modern tech could confirm human or military agency. Satellite or radar records might show anomalous aircraft or re-entry events. Declassified logs could link military exercises to that date and region. Isotopic patterns in cloth consistent with weapons testing would be incontrovertible. Acoustic modeling could estimate infrasound intensity and see if it reached levels that cause panic. So AI and modern methods help every camp, they're neutral tools. They can either shore up the avalanche explanation or expose evidence pointing to a different answer. It's important to be neutral. These tools could either confirm an iceberg of natural explanation or expose human causes. Either way, objective computational reanalysis reduces ambiguity and gives the public a clearer answer. Why does Dyatlov Pass keep captivating us? Because it sits at the junction of the modern appetite for mystery and the messy reality of incomplete evidence. There's something compelling about an unresolved, eerie event in remote snow. It invites pattern-making, storytelling, and the projection of the Cold War's anxieties. It also shows the limits of official narratives. When facts are missing, humans fill gaps with stories that match their fears. That's why any new, transparent reanalysis, especially one that uses neutral, repeatable computational steps, is valuable beyond the case itself. It models how truth can be pursued in ambiguous historical mysteries. After weighing the physical facts and the modern reinterpretations, a balanced assessment looks like this. The Avalanche/Slab model explains the tent cutting, immediate flight, and hypothermia elements plausibly and aligns with modern official conclusions that favor natural causes. It struggles most with the severity of certain internal injuries, but not decisively. Infrasound/wind panic plausibly explains the irrational flight behavior but lacks a direct causal chain to the severe trauma. Military/secret tests remain plausible to some due to the radiation detail and Cold War context, but require stronger documentary or isotopic proof. Combination scenarios are also possible. An unexpected snow event plus a shock wave or falling tree could together explain both panic and severe trauma. Put simply, the simplest, most evidence-consistent answer today remains some sort of localized snow movement or natural event, likely a slab avalanche variant. Possibly combined with disorientation and hypothermia. But until modern reanalysis either reproduces the injuries or uncovers new documentary records, the other theories will persist. Dyatlov Pass is more than a cold case. It's a mirror. It reflects how we deal with uncertainty, secrecy, and the limits of official narratives. It's also a cautionary tale about how gaps and fear breed conspiracy. The best remedy is transparent, reproducible analysis. That's why a data-driven approach matters beyond this single tragedy. Here's where you come in, Matt knows viewers. This is a debate that thrives on detail. If you have access to Russian-language documents, newly declassified files, or academic papers from the 2020s that you think help explain the mystery, share your thoughts and knowledge in the comments. Let's recap in plain terms. The facts: tent cut open from inside, footprints into the night, 9 dead, 2 with massive internal injuries, some garments slightly radioactive. The most parsimonious scientific explanation: a localized slab avalanche, a sudden snow movement that scared the hikers into flight and, combined with disorientation and hypothermia, led to death. This fits many but not all pieces. The competing explanations: infrasound panic, secret military activity, or combinations of the above. Each addresses gaps left by the Avalanche model but lacks the same explanatory economy and/or direct evidence. The AI/forensic promise, modern simulation, imaging, and isotopic techniques could decisively settle many outstanding questions, if we can access intact samples, precise scene coordinates, and declassified records. Dyatlov Pass is a case that reminds us, mystery thrives in the gaps between our data and our desire for narrative. Technology narrows those gaps, but human judgment remains essential. Thanks for watching Matt Knows. If this video held your attention, here's what to do next. Like and subscribe, more deep re-examinations are coming. Comment, which theory convinced you, and why. Use one short line, Avalanche/infrasound/military/other. I'll read and pin the best arguments. Share, if you know someone fascinated by mysteries or Cold War history, send them the link. Until next time, stay curious, be skeptical, and keep the debate alive. This one matters to history and to truth.